Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. I have an angelic face and a body made for love. At least that's what more than one man has told me. For me, this means that I have never had problems with male attention and had fun playing on this field until I was 24 years old. Then, after a serious conversation with my parents, I decided to settle down and seriously think about fulfilling my civic duty and giving them grandchildren. Being the only child of wealthy parents, I have never needed any serious qualifications or a serious job. My father tried to push me to study some field that would allow me to lead his business when he retired, but I simply wasn't interested. I don't know, maybe that's what subconsciously attracted me to Dave for the first time, but he was perfect. An excellent physical specimen, sharp as a whip, who has already received a degree in business and an MBA. I think Mom and Dad fell in love with him before I did. We got married a year later, and less than a month later I got pregnant. 10 years have passed, and I was the most beautiful soccer mom at the private school my children went to. I picked them up in a first-class BMW, and then drove them to our mansion in the greenest suburb of our city. Dave, or a 15-year-old schoolgirl who lived next door, looked after them 2 or 3 nights a week when I went to my job as chairman or board member of a particular church or charity. On weekends, I used to go shopping with my friends on Saturday, while Mom looked after the kids and Dave walked 18 holes with Dad. On Sunday mornings, Dave and I took the kids to church. I'm not a big believer, but at our social level it's kind of expected, you know? We were sitting on a bench that my grandfather sponsored after he made his first fortune. Later, we went to Sunday lunch at my parents' house, of course, with service, where recently Dad and Dave discussed the process of Dad's retirement and taking over my husband's ownership. After lunch, as a rule, we left the children with my parents, and Dave and I went home and did what married people do. Well, some of the things married people do. Yes, I have found the perfect man for myself, a fantastic father, an amazing breadwinner, and an attentive lover. I have money, comfort, status, respect, and almost everything I wanted. Almost. You've undoubtedly noticed that I've been having trouble reaching the moment lately. It all started with an erroneous keystroke when I was browsing the internet one day. One wrong key, 60 minutes of watching, 2 finger-triggered moments, and the days when my husband satisfied me were numbered. On the very first weekend, after I discovered the submissive side of myself, I took time off with my friends to go shopping, then pretended to be sick in order to stay at home and not go to church. After Sunday lunch, I tried to give up love with Dave, but to no avail. In the end, I still experienced a moment from his tongue, stretching my arms above my head, grabbing the headboard and imagining that I was tied to him. On the following Sundays, even these fantasies did not bring me the satisfaction I craved. One day I did reach down and pat myself, while Dave was coming in and out of me, but it was so unusual that he commented on it later. The obvious solution to my ever-growing craving was to confess my new addiction to my husband. I'm sure he would have done everything necessary to make me happy, but of course, good girls don't do that. Instead, I began to pretend, and my love dissatisfaction grew. I felt like a tightly coiled spring. My downfall began when I discovered the forum. There was a section where people could meet and then tell the rest of the readers how hot their last scene was. And they were hot, associated, blindfolded, in a collar. Their words were as moving as the images that accompanied them. I won't bore you with the details, but on the internet I met a guy who was an experienced dominant and lived a few hours away from me. The photos showed a guy who might be about 40 years old, but he still looks in good shape. He said he was married and his wife didn't like that. He shared his nude photos with me, but I sent him only pictures of my body. I was very careful and cleaned all the records from our computer, deleted the browsing history and all that. I kept some of my favorite things on a memory card, which I hid in the lining of a rarely used handbag. I don't think I've ever consciously made the decision to cheat on my husband. I've definitely never had an internal debate with myself. I just didn't take any steps to stop the situation when this guy, his name is Darren, ordered me to arrange a day off to meet him. My conscience didn't bother me much either. I felt compelled to satisfy a love interest that posed no threat to my marriage. No threat, because Dave was never supposed to find out, just like everyone else I know. Good girls don't do anything remotely like what I planned. I started making a list of all the things that I would need to provide. Darren seemed to regard my temporary silence as restraint. He inundated me with stories about what he was going to do to me when we met. Some of them were not to my taste, but we agreed. I know that being tied up by a complete stranger is a huge risk, but I was obsessed, as I said before. I hinted that our meetings could become regular, which meant that if he didn't give in the first time, there would be no repeat. In fact, I realized that the longer the affair lasts, the chances of exposure grow exponentially, and I vowed to limit this experience. You see, I've done my research. The negotiations ended, and I continued my research on how not to be caught. I know that people say that cheaters are always caught, but this is just propaganda and statistics. Stories and statistics about how people get away with cheating are never published. I imagine that for every detected betrayal, there are 10 hidden ones. So, over the next 3 weeks, my life returned to normal. Drop the kids at school, rush home, then read stories about cheating wives until it's time to pick up the kids again. My friends inevitably got tired of being rejected when they called to ask me to meet, but I didn't notice it at the time. At the very beginning of this journey, I discovered that one of the main signs that a cheating wife has been discovered is a change in behavior. A little honest introspection showed that I am giving all the signals to the one who is watching me. I forced myself to return to normal behavior when I was being watched, especially not forgetting to offer my husband to make love, but at the same time making a list of precautions. I have to meet Darren somewhere on the other side of town where I would never be recognized. My husband leaves for work at least 4 times a fortnight. After all, he is a business development manager at Dad's company. It's not difficult to prove that he is where he says he is. I'll ask him to take a picture of the room when I call in the evening, tell him that I miss him and want to imagine myself where he is. I have to leave the house only after 10 at night so that no one can call me or come to me and find that I am not at home. I intended to leave my mobile phone and car at home in case someone installed beacons on them. I'm supposed to meet Darren at an inexpensive motel where I'm unlikely to be noticed by my friends. It made me smile. I knew that at least 3 of my friends had successfully hidden their affairs in the past. Wouldn't it be ironic if I was discovered by a friend meeting her boyfriend at the same motel? I added a wig and other disguise items to the list. I have to keep them in my locker at the tennis club so that they are visible only for a minimum time. I have to pay for the room in cash and book it either in person a few days before or by phone from one of the charities where I volunteer. I will take a taxi to the motel, which will pick me up at the local park, which I will walk to. This way, no other people's cars will be visible in the driveway, and I won't be noticed leaving at an untimely hour. Thanks to mobile phones, phone booths in our city are a thing of the past, so the only weak point in my plans were calls to taxis on my mobile. The best thing I could do was immediately erase all records of the call. It's unlikely that Dave will check my phone log to check every single number. So, my husband and friends were sorted out. There was only the problem of what to do with the children. Our regular babysitter has to be home by 10 o'clock at night, and even in this case, you can't count on her not accidentally mentioning to her husband that she was babysitting while Dave was away. I wasn't going to look after them with the help of someone I didn't know, and the youngest is too young to spend nights out. There was only one possible, though far from attractive option. I can put my children to sleep and limit my time away. Let's say I leave at 10:15 p.m., an hour by taxi, 5 hours with Darren, another hour by taxi, and I can be home by 5:15 a.m., which at this time of year is still an hour before dawn. The wig and coat, which I almost never wear, were supposed to protect me from being identified by pre-dawn dog walkers and insomniacs. As unpleasant as it is to put my children to sleep, I was obsessed. The closer my preparations brought me to fulfilling my new fantasies, the more problems were revealed. In fact, it took a huge effort of will to critically analyze my plans. I experimented with various over-the-counter sleeping pills, all of which were listed as safe for young children, and found doses that made me wake them up when it was time to get up for school. To guarantee a 100% result, I did this every night for a week. She stopped only when Dave commented on their changed habits. It was during one of the internal security review sessions that I worried what would happen if Darren turned out to be a serial killer, or even if he got carried away and tagged me, going beyond our agreed boundaries. I noticed that his email address consists of initials and last name, and after half an hour of working at Google, I had the address. I subtly made it clear to him that before we met, I would leave clues about his identity in case I disappeared. He assured me that I would be safe. I also understood the weakness of a situation where he could be caught cheating on his wife, which would lead her to me and my husband. So I insisted that he take the same precautions as me. It was hard for me to believe that his wife knew and condoned his meetings with other women. He provided an STD test, which I demanded, since I love unprotected love, and there was no risk of unwanted pregnancy due to the birth control pills that I fanatically take every morning at 8:30. So, evening came. It's 10:10 p.m. I finished dressing in the tight black dress that Dave bought me a couple of years ago, and my bag with toiletries and a few things for the night, as my grandmother said, is already packed. The caller ID showed that Dave was calling from a number with an area code corresponding to where he was supposed to be 3 hours away on the flight. The taxi was already on its way, and the children were fast asleep in their beds. As a result, I paid in cash for 3 nights of room rental, of course, under an assumed name. The extra night was Darren's idea, and, as far as I'm concerned, it was quite reasonable. By the time I get there, and then I have to leave to get home before dawn, we'll have barely 5 quality hours. What if I like it and want more? Dave was away until his plane landed at lunchtime on Thursday. I could repeat what I would do tomorrow and Wednesday evening. After all, the money for the room does not mean anything to a wealthy lady like me. 3 nights to get it all out of my head. 3 nights so that it doesn't turn into a long-term activity where the chances of being discovered increase exponentially. Yes, it was a smart move. I logged into our computer to check if there were any last-minute emails from Darren. There weren't any. I checked to see if there were any evidence in the deleted folder, then sent a short text message to my future owner saying that I was already on my way. Glancing at my watch, I saw that it was time to go to the park to meet a taxi. After taking one last look in the mirror, I asked myself if I should step back even now. But the moisture in my panties said no. What could possibly go wrong? I put the phone on the kitchen counter and went out. By the time the taxi took me to the motel, I was all wet with anticipation. There was no one around, which pleased me. I knocked gently on the door of room 310 and smiled at Darren's foresight. There was already a do not disturb sign on the door handle. When Darren opened the door, only the bedside light was on. My first impression was disappointment. His photo on the website must have been outdated, because in reality he was 10 years older than I thought and weighed much more. Later, I noticed that his fingers were stained with nicotine, and when he kissed me, there was a distinct smell of alcohol mixed with stale cigarettes from his breath. That's all I had time to do before. After a short hello and touching my lips, he attacked me. I heard the dress tearing as he hurriedly took it off. As soon as it disappeared, he stood behind me, putting a muscular hand on my shoulder and covering my mouth. With his other hand, he pulled down my panties so that they slipped down to my ankles, and I was able to take them off. I wouldn't be surprised if they stuck to the wall they hit. I felt him fumbling with the clasp of my bra, but only for a few seconds before he just pulled it hard in his impatience. All the while, his rough hand was muffling my protesting sounds. I liked it. Almost tripping over my bag, which I dropped on the floor, Darren dragged me to the bed and, without letting me open my mouth, pushed me onto it. He somehow covered my mouth with his shoulder, freeing both hands to secure one and then both of my hands with handcuffs already attached to the bed. They were soft, but made of real steel and held my outstretched arms motionless. When I was helpless, he reached under the pillow and took out a harness, which he put on my head. I don't quite understand how it works, but she securely held some kind of ball in my mouth, making me completely unable to make speech sounds, except for grunts and moans. Then he roughly spread my legs and secured each ankle to the opposite posts of the bed. While I was basking in the sensations, already getting excited again from the feeling of helplessness, I thought that I had done the right thing. I can spend 3 nights in ecstasy without risk, and no one will ever know about it. However, stopping my new hobby in the near future may become a problem, but I am sure that the risk from this can be reduced if a little research is done. Tuesday, 9:45 a.m. Jen, this is Dave. The kids just called me and said that when they woke up this morning, the Portia was not at home. They searched the whole house, but they can't find her. Dave paused to catch his breath, which had been knocked out by the adrenaline surging through his system. His mother-in-law was worried about the tone of his voice. Well, she's not here. Can't you get there as soon as possible? Of course, I'll call you when I get there. Tuesday, 6:53 p.m., Thursday, 8 p.m. Dave, having flown home as fast as he could, had just finished hugging his children tightly. They were brave, but it was clear from their eyes that they were very worried. He turned to his relatives and thanked them for being with his family. Have you tried to go to the police again, Pete? Yes, the answer is the same. If there is no evidence to the contrary, within the first 48 hours they believe that the person just left. Everything is as neat as a pin, and there is no sign that the Porsche has just left the house. Dave intervened, except that her car is still in the garage and her phone is on the table near the back door, not in the charger where she usually keeps it. Portia's mother, Jen, noticed that the conversation had upset the children and took them to the kitchen to finish cooking dinner. Dave and Pete retired to the office. Dave's father-in-law lowered his voice to a more conspiratorial level. Her phone was here, but her house keys and purse weren't. It's like she just went out to the store and didn't come back. Except the nearest store is an hour away, and my Porsche would never leave the kids like that. There's another oddity, Dave. I found this on the kitchen table. An elderly man showed him a bottle of over-the-counter baby sedative and a tiny measuring cup. The obvious reason why these items were there did not suit a man who dearly loves his wife and respects her devotion to motherhood above all her other outstanding qualities. The possibility that she had deliberately drugged them was so far removed from his wife's image that he ignored her and returned to his worries. The last time his children saw their mother was when she put them to bed at 21:30 the night before. Where is she? His own phone call to the police confirmed the words of his relatives. Since there was no disturbance in the house, and his wife's purse and keys were missing, they assumed that she had simply left and did not want to be found. And so it happened. Then Dave called everyone in their notebook. No one saw the Porsche. He and his relatives focused on distracting the children, but that evening it was difficult for all family members to fall asleep. In the morning, Dave, staggering with fatigue, came to the kitchen, where Pete had already half drunk his coffee. They exchanged pleasantries. So far, the older man has not expressed his opinion. Dave, have you checked her email yet? You have access, right? Good idea, Dad. If she hasn't changed her password, I'll be able to access her account. They went to the office and started the family computer. The Porsche's password worked, and soon the pair were already spying with might and main. The incoming messages looked normal, and sorting the emails by sender and a quick trip through the list did not reveal any unfamiliar names. Pete, who felt more confident at the computer than his brother-in-law, suggested checking the deleted items folder. It turned out to be empty. The elderly man's heart sank even more. He suggested that Dave check the sent folder, already expecting that it would also be empty. It was almost like that. Almost, except for a single letter sent to Hardman a little after 10 o'clock on Monday evening. The simple message was chilling. I'll be there soon. Either Portia didn't bother to delete it, or it was transferred after she cleared the folder with sent messages. Dave turned away, and a bottle of baby sedative from the previous evening came into his field of vision. A connection clicked in Dave's head as Peter followed his gaze, and he quickly came to the same conclusion. Of course, she didn't do that. Did she, Dad? Is there a better theory? Anger at his wife fought for dominance with fear. It began to seem that Portia had hooked her children on illegal substances in order to meet someone on Monday evening, and for some reason did not return. Armed with these circumstantial evidence of foul play, Dave called the police again. They still refused to interfere, but offered to take the children for a blood test, which he did. After that, he took them to school and then went home. There he sent an email to Hardman. Just tell Portia to come home. Her kids are worried. If you hurt her, I will find you and kill you. Wednesday evening passed as slowly as the previous one. Early Thursday morning, the pathology laboratory called and reported that fairly high levels of chemicals contained in sedatives were found in the children's blood samples. With possible evidence of a crime, the police finally took the case seriously and requested the email address found on the computer, but warned them not to hope for it, since identifying people by email address is questionable at best. Having nothing else, all three adults sat at their phones and waited for the news. Thursday, 8:01 p.m. I was standing in front of my own front door, disheveled, exhausted, and scared. I clutched my torn, tight fitting black dress in my hands, the same one I wore on Monday evening so that it would not tear and expose my left, uncovered chest. I slowly inhaled and exhaled, trying to calm myself down, trying to forget the nightmare that had been the last 3 days, trying not to think about what was going to happen in the next few hours. But a nightmare. I couldn't shake the memory of the nightmare. I remembered what seemed to be many years ago, the feeling when my first moment weakened and a sweaty Darren grumbled at me. He must have seen the look of pleasure in my eyes, and probably, as a sadist, he didn't like it. He reached into my left ear and pulled something out from under the pillow. It was a device made of black leather, similar to a whip with 9 tails from the old days. He was wearing several leather tassels, each with a knot at the end. He continued to enter me, looking into my eyes all the time as he lifted the whip. Perhaps my expression had already changed when the first burning blow fell on my tender chest. It hurt, and my eyes should have shown him that, as well as my muffled scream. His expression was disgusting when he wielded the whip. I looked down and saw the ominous scars on my chest. His repeated promises not to hit me lasted less than 5 minutes. It was only now that I realized what a completely helpless situation I had put myself in. My mind was terrified of what Darren might do next and how he would leave my body. The smell of the liquid rushed into my nostrils, evoking memories associated with it, and I threw up. Strange sounds brought me back from the place where my terrified mind was rushing. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was that the expression of intense pleasure had disappeared from Darren's face. It was replaced by an expression of anguish. He gasped and clutched at his chest, and his face turned sickeningly white. While I was watching, he suddenly collapsed on top of me and twitched for maybe half a minute before I heard a sound I'd only read about in books. The death rattle. Suddenly failed lungs, from which air was escaping when gravity was doing its job. Unmistakable, even to someone who has never heard it before, and terrifying. Darren was dead. All his weight was pressing on my chest, and it seemed to me that every time I exhaled, I did not have the strength to fill my lungs again. I was panicking, but since my arms and legs were completely stretched out, I couldn't find any leverage to push him off. Finally, I think because of my sweat smearing our body contact, Darren's body slid into a position that was more on my stomach than on my chest. His head was in my left armpit, and when I looked down, I saw that his sightless eyes were still open and staring at me. From his mouth, since his stomach was slightly higher than his head, something fragrant and sweet was seeping out. The smell was fighting my own vomit. As terrible as the experience was, it was pushed into the background by my horror. It was probably 11:30 p.m., and I was stuck here, unable to call for help because I couldn't communicate except to grumble or reach out to the wall to tap on it with any part of my body. I'm stuck here until the maid comes to check if anything is needed in the room. When? At 9 or 10 in the morning. By this time, my children will have to wake up from a sleep caused by illegal substances, go to my mother's room to wake her up, and find that she is not there. I could imagine their horror when they found the house empty, and it made me panic and start rushing around. However, I pulled myself together, thinking that I could move Darren's body back to the position where my lungs were being squeezed. I stopped moving and started crying. What will my children do when they find themselves alone? Will they go to the neighbors? Or they'll use the speed dial sheet next to their home phone and make a call? To whom? To Dave or my parents? Neither of them would do. Dave will be scared and confused and will immediately call my cell phone, which will ring from the table near the door of the house. Then he'll call my parents, and Mom will go to the house as fast as she can. Dad will be at work. She'll find out that I'm gone and maybe my phone, but my purse is gone. And then what? Will she call Dave? Will he call the police? Anyway, I'm fucked. If only? And then my mind grabbed at straws. The maid will not come very early, and I will be able to convince her to find the keys to the handcuffs and let me go, and then promise her enough money so that she does not immediately call the police. I can get cash quickly and without a trace, maybe 10,000. I can rush home as soon as possible, wake up the kids, apologize for oversleeping, and take them to school, then call the police. I can threaten them with prosecution if they tell the media about it, and settle everything by the time the children graduate from school or ask their mother to pick them up. There's nothing wrong with that. 2 consenting adults participate in legitimate activities, which just went really badly. Everything was fine. Everything will be fine. Then I remembered that I had booked a room for 3 fucking days. But that was okay too. The maid still checks every room daily for fresh towels and so on. Then I remembered the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the outside handle, and all my illusions collapsed. I heard myself make a sound through the gag that was half a moan, half a sigh. The death rattle of my marriage and perfect life. Fatally stained with Darren's and my bile and, judging by the signals from my bladder, soon with urine. I think I spent the next hour trying more and more desperately to remove the gag. But the only thing I could rub it against was Darren's cheek, and it wasn't hard enough. It became a little more promising when rigor mortis set in and I damn near rolled the balloon out. What struck me was that Darren's mustache seemed to continue to grow after death. Closing my eyes, I couldn't see the terrible grimace his face had turned into, but nothing could protect me from the growing stench entering the room. Death doesn't smell very nice. Soon the rigor passed and Darren went soft again, by which time there was nothing left in my stomach that could be evacuated. Daylight filtered through the tightly closed curtains, slightly raising the temperature in the room. It's enough to make my trembling subside a little. Darren's chilled body was drawing a lot of heat out of mine. Much worse than the danger of hypothermia and the humiliation of lying in your own urine was the problem of thirst. How long can a person go without water? I seem to remember that no more than 2 or 3 days. I might have known this if I had paid more attention at school, rather than spending all my efforts making sure that my clothes were better than other girls and that they were revealing enough to attract the main male attention in the classroom. Then I thought that death might be preferable to what awaits me. My legacy and memory may be destroyed, but at least I won't be around to see it. Judging by the brightness of the curtains, the sun had risen high enough to penetrate the narrow gap between the rows of rooms in the cheap motel, which once again confirmed that there would be no salvation that day. My tongue was already stuck to the roof of my mouth, and I hadn't urinated since about the middle of the day. Small blessings. I hoped I could speak fast enough so that the maid wouldn't call the police when she found me in the morning. Since there were no police, all sorts of explanations were plausible. But as night fell, even I realized that some of them were bizarre delusions caused by despair and thirst. I think my last conscious thought, before the headache and delirium consumed me, was simple: I'm finished. The heroine's mother was zeroed out because of one stupid decision. I have never met the maid who found me, although I would really like to do it one day when I am armed with something deadly. My first memory was of being shaken on a gurney when they put me in an ambulance. I was hooked up to one of those devices that drip substances into you. The ambulance staff obviously recognized my extreme dehydration and started pouring fluids into me. They also put my purse next to me. My next memory is of being wheeled to the hospital and someone trying to take my bag. I clung to her as if she were a terrible death. I'll contact my family when I'm ready, and I'll have at least half a chance to defend a plausible story. Until then, I was going to remain anonymous. With the help of heat packs and a drip, and then small sips of water, I physically recovered enough to start thinking straight again after lunch. The planning was interrupted when I was questioned by the police. I insisted on the truth and reminded them of their duty to be careful, threatening prosecution, personally, if the media found out about my story. As he left, the sergeant followed me with a look that seemed to mix amusement and pity. By the middle of the day, I had a reliable story, but I won't bore you. A lot of it depended on my family being so relieved by my sudden appearance that they wouldn't ask too many questions. During the evening rounds before 7 o'clock in the evening, the staff doctor finally let me go, and I quickly put on my torn dress. On the way, I asked the nurse if there was a clothing store nearby that was open at this time of day, and I got a sharp and rather cold no. She nevertheless deigned to call me a taxi, and I sat at the entrance to the hospital and waited for him, calm and confident, despite my outfit. There was a TV in the waiting room tuned to the 7 o'clock news, and that ended my confidence and my life. The main news was about the little old me. There were photos of me lying on a motel bed under Darren's dead body, apparently taken by a maid and sold to the media. My face was darkened, I suppose, for legal reasons. After all, it was a scene under the control of the coroner. However, the TV cameras did not show such courtesy. How they got ahead of the departing ambulance, I'll never know, but they did it. My face was clearly visible when the gurney was brought to the ambulance. They even showed me one of the handcuffs still attached to my wrists. I lost consciousness, and I must have been almost carried to the taxi when it pulled up. Who gave the driver my address is a mystery, but my next memory is that I am standing here, right now, facing the door leading to the execution yard, devoid of hope and even the desire to fight. Monday, 11 a.m. All the illusions I could have had lasted about 300 milliseconds after my husband opened the door. Over his shoulder, I saw the TV. It was tuned to the very station on which I had seen myself so recently. He looked into my eyes, raising an eyebrow questioningly. That was it. My moment of truth. My opportunity to say that I was kidnapped, handcuffed to a bed, and bullied for 3 days. That I was worthy of his pity, not his contempt. Then I looked at my phone, still lying on the table next to the door, at the purse in my hand, then at what I was wearing. With that last look, all the remaining struggle in me faded away. I knelt down in shame and defeat. Dave didn't have to say a word. As if that wasn't enough, I heard a high-pitched voice ask from somewhere behind me, Really, Portia? Are you pumping your own children with illegal substances?" It was my own mother's voice. If my mother is confident enough to condemn me, I know that in my father's eyes I will be written off. He loves Dave like the son he never had, almost as much as he loves me. I don't know how long it took after the door slammed in my face. I heard a voice behind me asking me to confirm my name. It was the police. I was arrested, handcuffed, taken to the police station, and charged. When I was presented with the evidence, my fingerprints on the sedative bottle, my absence from the house, and the blood tests of the children, I saw no point in denying anything. The media, of course, went berserk. A famous mother pumps her children with illegal substances so that she can go on a date with her lover. And not just with some lover, but her dominant. And then this lover dies when she is tied to a bed and trapped for 3 days. After 4 nights in prison, when it became obvious that no one was going to post bail, the state released me on my own recognizance. Someone must have alerted the media, as they were all waiting for me outside the prison, and it was the longest walk of my life until they finally gave up. I reconsidered my options when my feet took me to the main street of the city. Did I tell you before that I was reset? In fact, I have become a negative value of several million. My shallow social friends will never have anything to do with me again, without risking being smeared with my poison. My children are old enough to understand that I risked and betrayed them in the worst way a mother could. Besides, they have a caring father and 2 pairs of close grandparents. They don't need me. If I had stayed, they would have laughed at me and spat at me until the memory of my behavior disappeared, and then they would have just shunned me until death. I looked into my wallet to see how much cash I had. Less than $200. I saw an ATM on the other side of the street and decided to check if any of my cards were still working. In my opinion, the odds were 50-50, but we all know how bad my judgment has been lately. If at least one of my cards works, I'll turn left towards the bus station. If it doesn't work, I'll turn right, to the bridge over the long descent to the river. I inserted the first card and held my breath, and